AEW All In 2025 was by far one of the company's most successful events to date. It had everything you could ever want from a pro wrestling show. Multiple engaging storylines leading in, epic main events that left us all in awe, and a moment at the very end that had every fan screaming, "I love professional wrestling," as Hangman Adam Page finally took the AEW championship out of the briefcase, held it above his head proudly, and was proclaimed the biggest babyface in the company. And to many fans, All In was a bit of a watershed moment as far as AEW's resurging popularity. But one thing that got left behind in all of the talk about how great it was the story of the Death Riders leading in. I myself have been very critical about the way the Death Riders were portrayed on TV, and at one point was even calling for AEW to pivot so far as to give the belt to the likes of Powerhouse Hobbs, Adam Copeland, or just about anyone else who was in the running for the AEW championship. That's how bad the Death Riders were, and yet I think that I may have gotten this one wrong. At least kind of. I'm going to get into it. We're going to talk about why the AEW Death Rider storyline was actually good. Be sure to smash that thumbs up, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. I'm Omer Q for Real Take Wrestling. Let's dive in. Ever since Wrestle Dream 2024, when Moxley defeated the American Dragon Bryan Danielson for the AEW World Championship, the belt had been locked up in a box. And the story going in over the next couple of months was that Moxley was shielding the World Championship until a worthy challenger could defeat him. That Jon Moxley was there to save AEW. That Moxley was there to bring out the best in this young up-and-coming roster that had not necessarily lived up to the expectations that were set before him. And in a way, that storyline makes a lot of sense. There was a lot of criticism of several AEW talents, the Darby Allins of the world, the Sammy Guevaras, the Jack Perrys, stars who, when AEW first started in 2019, were deemed to be the future, not just of this company, but of the entire business. And the fact of the matter is, if we're really being honest with ourselves, they have fallen short of those expectations. And while I am not going to say that all of it is their fault, certainly some of the blame has to go to the idea that they just, for whatever reason, were not able to live up to that billing. And that was a almost meta storyline that AEW was trying to tell with the Jon Moxley Death Rider character. And yet, it seemed like it was good at first. Moxley was coming out and he was talking about how he wanted people to earn their keep in AEW, and that he would rather burn this place to the ground than see it run amok and see it be weak. And the interesting thing about the story was the character of Jon Moxley was a bit of a liar. Yes, he was one of the best wrestlers in the world. Yes, he was the AEW World Champion. And yes, he had a point when he said that the young and up-and-coming wrestlers had not lived up to the billing that was set before them. However, Moxley's motivations were masked as good for the company, but in reality, the character was very selfish. He had the Death Riders, Claudio Castagnoli, Wheeler Yuta, Marina Shafir, Pac, coming out and helping him every step of the way. And in the story that they seemed to be telling, it was that of an egomaniac who had lost control and honestly lost all sense of reality because he had gotten too big for himself and that he felt like he deserved the AEW World Championship. In a vacuum, that is a fantastic story, and in many ways, you could say that that is good. However, the problem with the Death Rider storyline arises with the week-to-week telling of the story. Yes, we were all very upset by big main event matches with the likes of Swerve Strickland, Adam Copeland, and many others being ended in schmozzes as the Death Riders and the numbers game took over in this almost bloodline-esque storytelling that AEW was trying to do, but it just did not fit with the week-to-week television. And here's why. AEW did not tell this story in the right way. If you wanted to tell a story where the numbers game was a factor, then you should have focused on that from the get-go. That should have been the prevailing sentiment going into these big matches. And I think this in part has to do with the rumor and innuendo that Darby Allin was originally supposed to be the end game for this feud, and eventually, because of the disconnecting of this storyline, it ended up being Hangman Adam Page, who we will get to in just a second. But the point is, the faults of the Death Riders lie in their disconnect with the week-to-week TV and the pay-per-views. The week-to-week TV, when Moxley was the champion, was up and down. One week he is talking about a higher power. The next week he is talking about his own prowess. The next week he is just spewing garbage that no one can really make any coherent sense of. And the idea that this would be an engaging champion for a long time is just laughable, especially to the AEW audience, which is less predisposed to liking storylines that just kind of aura farm like the Bloodline story was. The reason the Bloodline story worked is because that audience ate it up. You could just send Roman Reigns out there and it was good. And do not get me wrong, I still think in 2022 and 2023, that is some of the best storytelling that any wrestling company has ever told with the Bloodline, but it got played out. And I think with the AEW audience, with the way that they were telling the story, with the way that Moxley was presented week to week, it just was not clicking, and it, again, felt disconnected, felt discombobulated, and it just felt boring. Because you knew at the end of the day, Moxley was just going to have the numbers game by his side. And it didn't feel like AEW was building up a good challenger, and that is the second biggest problem with the Death Rider story. For a very long time, it wasn't very clear who it could be. And this was during a time where AEW was having trouble with some of their stars being injured, stars not having the same hype about them as they once did. And it led to, I think, some of the fans just kind of clicking out of the TV and watching something else and ignoring the storyline completely. But enter Hangman Adam Page. And I think this is where the idea of the Death Rider storyline actually being good kind of comes into play. When Hangman Adam Page won the Owen and the lead up to that final with Will Ospreay, it felt like things were shifting. It felt like AEW had a more focused story they were telling. Hangman Adam Page emerged as a clear-cut favorite to win the AEW World Championship. Hangman Adam Page became a clear-cut favorite to be the next big face of the company. Hangman Adam Page became the clear-cut favorite to redeem himself at All In. And that became a more interesting story than I think anything the Death Riders ever did, because everyone was enthralled with this redemption arc of Hangman, who had burned people's houses down, who had done unspeakable things to Swerve Strickland in their all-out 2024 match, and who over those last couple of months had kind of come to grips with the fact that the sins of his past were indeed that, and he began to regret many of the things he had done. That, to me, is why the Death Rider storyline, or the Death Riders themselves, I should say, were a better foil for Hangman. The Death Riders themselves were still flawed, and I think if you ask me in a year, I'm going to give you the same answer. I don't think that the Death Rider storyline itself was actually good, but in a way, they were the better foil for the better story that was to come, and that was the redemption of Hangman Page. So when you have a babyface like Hangman who is trying to redeem himself, what better thing to put up against him? What better thing to put up against a guy who is coming back from the depths of hell as a demon to become an angel again than putting Satan himself in front of him? And I mean that in the meta way. I mean that in the storyline. I mean that in every way. Jon Moxley was AEW's Satan from the latter part of 2024 and the beginning of 2025, for better and worse. Presented as a heel on TV, the storyline that everyone was complaining about, everything going into it, it felt like Hangman Page was going to save us, the fans, from all of it. And I think that despite its flaws, despite the fact that I still think AEW should have told this story better, and the fact that Jon Moxley, for the majority of his title run, was pretty ass, this was the perfect foil for Hangman Adam Page in that moment. wrestling, as well as much of storytelling, is full of contradictions. Life is full of contradictions. And we can say that while the Death Rider story was bad, this run they had between May to July was exactly what the company, the story, and Hangman Page, the character, needed in order to have this big moment that we all celebrated at All In 2025. It was not perfect by any means, nor is any storyline in pro wrestling, but it was exactly what was necessary. And in that way, you could very well make the argument that Jon Moxley and the Death Riders and that title run that lasted way too long, in my opinion, was actually pretty damn good. Let me know in the comment section, though. I'm sure many of you have thoughts on this. Let me know down below. Also, be sure to smash that thumbs up, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you get notified whenever a new video is released. Until next time, I'm Omer Q for Real Take Wrestling. Be happy, be healthy, and as always, keep it real.